Good evening and welcome, everybody. We are honored to host Professor Peter Selg from Switzerland. Professor Selg, with your permission, I will switch to Hebrew and introduce you. אז אחרי 3 שבועות של הפוגה, אנו שבים להרצאות שאנחנו מקיימים מאז ה7 באוקטובר. כל כך קיוויתי שאני אוכל הערב לברך תחילה על שובם של החטופים. אך לא כך הדבר. בימים כה מאתגרים, כולנו זקוקים לנקודת מבט נוספת, אולי לנקודות מבט נוספות, בכדי לא להישאב מטה לצער העמוק ולתאומות הנפש על המצב בישראל. הערב אנחנו מתכבדים כמובן לארח את פרופסור פטר זלג משוויץ, שידבר איתנו על נושא ספרו החדש, חנה ארנדט ומאבקה בעבור ישראל. הספר ראה אור בינואר 24 השנה, והוא כמובן התייחס בהרצאתו גם לאירועים שהמדינה שלנו עוברת מאז ה7 באוקטובר. פרופסור זלג, מי שלא מכיר, הוא רופא אנתרופוסוף ומנהל מכון איטה וגמן למחקר בארסהיים. הוא פרסם עשרות ספרים ומאמרים בגרמנית, וחלקם אף תורגם לאנגלית. פטר זלג היה העורך המרכזי בכנס השנתי של רפואה אנתרופוסופית שהתקיים בישראל ב-2023, והוא הרצה על איטה וגמן והאומץ לרפא, ועל רפואה וריפוי שלאחר אושוויץ. יש לו קשר עמוק ליהדות, והוא חוקר וכותב אודות השואה בהקשר האנתרופוסופי. לכבוד המרצה המכובד שלנו, אני מזמינה אתכם להישאר עם מצלמות פתוחות, מיקרופונים סגורים, ואני מאוד אשמח להתייחסותכם בתום ההרצאה, בהשתתפות או בכתיבה. ההרצאה כמובן מוקלטת ותשלח לכל הנרשמים. אז אני מאחלת לכולנו ערב מעשיר ושנזכה לימים טובים ושקטים. פרופסור זלג, the stage is yours. Please.
Erev Tov, Israel, thank you very much for this very friendly invitation to give a lecture tonight about Hannah Arendt and her relationship to Israel. I think it's not an easy theme in these days, but I'll try to do my best for a presentation of her thoughts, of her struggle, maybe also of her hope. From an anthroposophical point of view, I would say we need this kind of support from those who lived before us. And Steiner said so often that we can't solve our major problems with our own force alone. Maybe more than ever, we need support also in Israel for coming to the next better stage of life. And we know from Hannah Arendt that she was busy with Israel. Her whole biography, even from the distance, as you know, she lived then in the second part of her biography in New York. She was intensively involved with Israel till the end of her life. And I thought the presentation should have 3 parts. I will start with the theme, which is one of the difficult ones, but I think still in a way also overshadowing her image, partly in Israel. It is this Eichmann trial. This Eichmann trial and her report about the trial, which was published in 1963. So I was born in 1963, and I think most of you know about it from school and university time, all these discussions about the book, which was published in Hebrew, as far as I know, in 2000. The translation was prepared for a long time. It is not our major theme tonight, but I want to point out what was important for Hannah Arendt at this time. And then the longer part, the second part of my presentation, it's a little bit of history about her sympathy, but also her struggling with Israel. It's necessary to say that she was positive to the state Israel, but she wanted to have another shape of politics. And she knew very well, as far as I see, the forces of destruction from the outside and the inside. And then to close, the third little part will be a kind of a view to her personality and elements of the future in her own being. And I developed the courage to talk about her because I'm not at all a specialist for Hannah Arendt, but I developed the courage because we started a project in the general anthroposophical section of the Goetheanum now 4 years ago. And in this project, that means Constanza Karlix and me from the leading group of the general section, we came to the point that we thought it's good to talk in the Goetheanum and internationally about thinkers of the future out of a spiritual Judaism. So Martin Buber shaped the terminus Hebrew humanism. And we started, in fact, in 2020, in the Corona time, with lectures, presentations, and later publication about Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig, his close friend. And then we went on with presentations and publications about Primo Levi, Simon Weil, Hannah Arendt, Hans Jonas, Gustav Landauer, and lately Marie Darmstädter, Emmanuel Levinas, and Paul Celan. And recently we concentrated on a Jewish thinker which is almost unknown, but will be known in the future, Margarete Sussman. And in November this year, we will have Gershom Scholem. And we are looking forward to next year because we want to commemorate the founding of the Hebrew University, which was, as you know, opened 1st of April, 1925. So next year, 100 years, we will focus on Hugo Bergmann, of course, I would say, because he came partly from Dornach. He came from Prague, as many of you know, but he said goodbye to Dr. Steiner when he went to Israel and later became so famous in the country also for the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus. And then we will maybe finish the serial of lectures and presentations with a concentration on Ernst Müller, who was maybe the most well-known anthroposophist and specialist for the Kabbalah. Even Gershom Scholem respected Ernst Müller as an anthroposophist, knowing the Kabbalah. So, and of course, it is the question, why do we talk about these thinkers? I know they are not well known, even not in Israel, and even not in our anthroposophical circles. But we have the conviction that these are important spirits for the future, and that their support, as I mentioned at the beginning, is important for the future. And so in this serial of lectures and books, I made a little more biographical sketch about Hannah Arendt, and later on worked a little bit more on it, on the relationship to Israel. And I thought this is maybe a good theme for tonight. So I was asked by Nurit and Eyal, and so I thought maybe this is a theme. But from another perspective, I was and I am unsure, because I thought from the distance, and you now are living in Germany and work in Switzerland. It is far away, not inwardly far away, but geographically far away. And I thought, how is it to listen tonight? And I think you all had a very difficult morning and the events of last night. And how is it to listen to Hannah Arendt, her kind of warning thoughts, her kind of sorrows? And it can be a kind of I thought maybe it's not easy to listen to all of this, because maybe we can say, okay, well, partly maybe she was right, but this is so half a century ago or even longer. So, but what we do now? So in a way, it can be received as a kind of such a serious voice of the past saying, take care that it does not happen, but it happened. So, and for us, it is not very helpful to say Hannah Arendt was right. Yeah, maybe partly she was, but what does it mean for us now? So I thought maybe how it's for you just to listen to such thoughts, but from an anthroposophical point of view, to be honest, I think it is always worth to listen, and not as a kind of an attack, not a kind of a, how to say, a kind of a preaching or a kind of somebody who knows it better, but just a voice, one of these voices of the 20th century, but of a living human being and of a still living spirit. So from a anthroposophical point of view, as I said, I think we need this relationship. Of course, Hannah Arendt today would say other things, maybe not the opposite, but she was always close to the given reality now. And she would not be interested to have recapitulated what she said 70, 80 years ago. She would say this was 80 years ago, what is relevant now. But from my historical studies, I think that we'll find these individualities and maybe also receive actual inspirations if we have to find a starting point in history, not meaning that what they said 80 or what Steiner said 100 years ago is now the word exactly for our time, but it is a kind of a bridge to him as a spiritual entity. So, and in a way, I think Hannah Arendt is really interesting. One of the biographers of her, maybe the best, it was Elizabeth Young. She said about Hannah Arendt, because she trusted her own thinking, she was prepared to make uncomfortable judgments. I think this is very important, to trust your own thinking and how to develop this trust in the own thinking. So I hope we'll learn something from her tonight. Maybe not special, how to say, special predictions, but also this ability for this individual judgment. And the second remark, and then, or the second little announcement, I'm not at all a specialist for Israel. You know it. So I've been 2 times in the country, short times. And so I could never give an advice what to do, but you did not expect this advice tonight. But for me, it's absolutely clear that persons as me are not allowed. But I'm maybe allowed to give a little bit a view to Hannah Arendt. And I was always, I was very touched. The last evening I stayed in Israel in May. I was living together only one night with Stephanie and Gilad Alon. And there were 2 options for the evening. The one was to join Stephanie and to go to the class lesson, and the other one was to join Gilad and to go to the demonstration. So they said to me, smiling, Peter, what do you prefer? And I preferred this time to go with Gilad to Haifa, to one of these many demonstrations. And he gave me a sign for the streets. And when I published this little booklet about Hannah Arendt, the Shoah and the struggle for Israel, I decided on the first page, there should be maybe the sign, the sign Gilad gave to me. It's this one, not easy to read, but in Hebrew and in Arab and English, it was written on the sign, democracy and occupation cannot coexist. Looking the occupation in the eye. So it was my last evening in Israel, taking part in this Haifa demonstration. You all know it was a very serious atmosphere in the country, even before this most horrible attack on the 7th of October happened. And the feeling of a way to the abyss. And yeah, anyhow, it was a demonstration atmosphere which was for me touching, because there was a kind of music in the air, a kind of hope. And I know the demonstrations in Germany, they are quite often burdened with tension and I don't know. But this Haifa night was special. It was serious. It was knowing about an open future, but there was also another element in the air, which I shall never forget. So this was the last stay there, and yeah, Gilad knows very well. Yeah, the first point, I don't want to elaborate it in a bigger extension, but this Eichmann discussion, or Hannah Arendt as the one who published the book, I think it's needed to go for a short time to this difficult situation at this time. For Hannah Arendt, when she heard David Ben-Gurion speaking after his announcement of the successful capture of Adolf Eichmann, so the head of the Jewish department in what we call the Reichssicherheitshauptamt in Berlin, so the man who was a co-organizer, as you know, of all the deportations and the recorder of the Wannsee conference, when she heard David Ben-Gurion speaking that they got him and they will organize the trial about him in Jerusalem, that she directly developed the wish to go there, to be present. And she directly wrote a letter some weeks after to one of her best friends, Mary McCarthy, saying, I'm tempted. I'm very tempted to go there. And she said in an explanation in another letter that it is a trial concerning the state-organized administrative mass murder. It is a trial against crime against humanity committed against the Jewish people. And for her, it was clear she wanted to be there. And that happened then a year later, April the 11th, when the court opened, and she attended, in fact, a quarter of the 121 sessions. She has read more than 3,600 pages of Eichmann's interrogation transcript. And she also talked to many people in Jerusalem at this time, normal people, but also she had a date, an encounter with Golda Meir. Yeah, you know, the foreign minister at this time, with the Minister of Justice, it was Pinchas Rosen, and also with the leading judge of the court, which was Moshe Landau. So she was really present, and maybe from a historical retrospective perspective, it's not easy to understand why her book later on was so negatively discussed. I think it were three major points of criticism: her view on Adolf Eichmann, her criticism of the trial, and also her criticism of the Jewish councils in the NS time, of the so-called Judenräte. I make it very short. The first point, she came to a conclusion which she had not before, but she came to this conclusion during the trial, that she said Adolf Eichmann, it's not a fanatical anti-Semitic person. It is not, he was not full of hate against the Jews. He had no particular ideological impulse. She said he was just a kind of a mediocre functionary. It was a bureaucrat. He was not at all a leading central figure in the German extermination system. And he was styled, but willingly styled to a hero of the extermination. But this is an overestimation of Eichmann's authority. He was not the organizer. He was the administrator. It was not Reinhold Heydrich or Heinrich Himmler. He was just an administrative person with a lower position, subordinate, executive organ. She said this is not diminishing the problem. It is quite the opposite, because the functioning of the functionary is a problem. This is not an action. This is only a function. This is not done out of the responsibility of and the judgment of a human being. It is just a kind of German obedience, more than Nazi ideology, she said. And she said, and it was important for her, but because she said the media produce, the mass media, they have a kind of a temptation to produce demonic criminals. And there are a kind of allegation of power and depth. So a kind of a temptation looking for demonic figures. But she said Eichmann was not. So not evil was banal, but this man, so this administrator, this functionary, this is not the man presented by David Ben-Gurion. It is not the man. She never said he is innocent or he's not guilty. She said the opposite. And she was positive to the trial, and she was also positive to the death sentence. You know that Martin Buber said no to the death sentence, that Hugo Bergmann said no, or even Yehuda Bakon said no. Israel shouldn't do it. But she said, yes. So this was not the problem for her. The problem was the figure of Eichmann and the demonization of an ordinary man. So not evil is ordinary, but this type of functioning. So this makes the riddle of evil even bigger, because it is more or less behind a human being from a spiritual point of view. Second point, shortly, she was positive to the trial, but not to the purpose of the trial, because she said this trial had a political role in the Israel policy, especially by David Ben-Gurion. He wanted to have this trial in Israel, that there is more identification with the state of Israel. So the trial played a role, a political role, and this was against her inner conviction that justice should be separated from policy. You know all how actual these questions are in many countries and also in Israel. The independency of justice and not being a kind of an organ of the state. And this trial played a role. And now modern historians can describe it very well. I will quote one of the modern historians. He said, in fact, you know it all very well from the country, from the history of Israel, but maybe it's good to quote anyhow. In fact, the Holocaust hardly played a role in the public consciousness in Israel in the 1950s. The survivors who had found refuge in the country were seen as failures and cowards and preferred to keep their memories and the horrors of persecution to themselves. This changed with the Eichmann trial, in which the prosecution deliberately pursued the strategy of bringing up the history of the persecution and murder of the European Jews in detail through a wealth of testimonies, and thus actually generated an overwhelming response in the country. The Eichmann trial thus marked the beginning of the era of Holocaust witnesses. This, the memory of the genocide, became constitutive of Jewish identity. So maybe we could ask ourselves, but is this wrong? Is this not a part of Jewish identity of the 20th century? Maybe we can be surprised that it did not play the role before. For Hannah Arendt, it was completely different because she was fully aware of the Shoah. She was a refugee herself from Berlin, and she was an expert for the camps in the 40s. I will come to this point she reported in the American journals in the 1940s what was going on in the German concentration camps. And after the war, she was, together with Primo Levi, maybe the first who described in detail the system of these concentration and extermination camps. So she was fully aware. Her problem was not that other people became aware, it was absolutely the time to know about it, but she had the conviction that it played a role in the Israel policy of this time. The function of the trial in her approach was to create an identity of the Israel Jewish state in a hostile world. The quotation of Hannah Arendt, the trial should show the Israelis what it means to live among non-Jews. It should convince them that a Jew can only be safe and live in honor in Israel. And for this was for Hannah Arendt a very dangerous thought or conviction that Israel is the only safe place for Jews, and that more or less the rest of the world is more or less full of anti-Semitism. And this was for her a kind of ideology, a kind of a disregarding the reality and the historical developments since 1945, and including Israel's own development. And she said this function of the trial is a very, very difficult and dangerous one. And let it be as it is. But that's the point she brought. And last, maybe the most discussed, her criticism on the Jewish councils during the time of the Shoah. So the theme did not came by her own in her report. It came during the trial by Adolf Eichmann, who said in his statements that he had a wonderful cooperation with the Jewish functionaries in selection, transport lists, deportation lists, administration. And Hannah Arendt was not the first person who showed this or underlined it. Also Raoul Hilberg, in his famous book about the destruction of the European Jews. But also in Hannah Eichmann's report, it was said, and she said, this role of the Jewish leaders in the destruction of their own people is undoubtedly the darkest chapter in the entire dark history of the Jews. Hannah Arendt knew that they worked under very difficult conditions. And part of them never collaborated with the Germans. Only a part of it did it. Others committed suicide, and for her, it was only an example, she said, for the totality of the moral collapse, as part of a system of totalitarianism. It is producing a moral collapse. And those who failed were part of the system. And it was never Hannah Arendt's conviction that the Jews were not able to resist. In fact, she, in the 1940s, during the Shoah, she was describing in New York journals about the resistance movement in Warsaw and other kind of resistance Jewish groups. And she collected information because she was a person of resistance. It was never her conviction that what some of the functionaries did was typical for the Jewish people. And she never said, how could they? But she said it happened. And functionaries is a difficult level of being part of policy. But she had never the conviction that the Jews of the diaspora had gone to their death like sheep. It was part of the conviction of the politicians of Israel at this time that they said this Jewish powerlessness in the diaspora and the heroism was in Israel. So this was partly a conviction of David Ben-Gurion, but not of Hannah Arendt. She had the conviction that there was a lot of resistance in Jewish prisoners, and even there would have been no, which is not true. Then she said no non-Jewish group and no other people behave differently under the same circumstances. So to end with this part, but after the book was published, or it started with the reports in the New Yorker, which was a journal, there began a political campaign against Hannah Arendt, which was very, very strong. We know it from political campaigns of our days, or if they start and they become very strong, you have no chance as an individual against such a powerful propaganda and mass judgment. I wouldn't say that it's her best book, or I would say there are sentences in the book about Eichmann maybe could be better, but in no way, from my point of view, it's only my own opinion, in no way it justifies this kind of campaign against her, and she really felt in a way powerless. She couldn't do anything against it as an individual. Gershom Scholem said that something is missing in Hannah Arendt, and he wrote it in a letter to her, Ahabat Israel. So the love for the Jews is missing in her case. First of all, she answered, I have never in my life loved any people or collective, neither the German, nor the French, nor the American, nor the working class, or anything else in that price range. In fact, I only love my friends, and I'm completely incapable of any other love. Secondly, however, this love for the Jews would be suspect to me, since I myself am Jewish. I do not love myself, and not that which I know somehow belongs to our substance. I can only admit one thing to you on the whole issue, namely that injustice committed against my own people naturally upsets me more than injustice committed by other people. So one of these discussions. Yeah, so let's finish the point one as a kind, but it's in a way it is, it's not easy to finish it because in a way it's irritating, and it was not her last contribution to Israel, but it was hard for her that it was now so negatively seen. Yeah. So now come to the second point, and a little bit coming also to the biography of Hannah Arendt. As I mentioned, she came to the trial in 1961. At this time, she was 55 years of age. She came from New York, as I mentioned, and so a little sketch of her biography, maybe to get some distance from the Eichmann discussions. Born in Hanover in 1996. I won't tell you the story of her life, but only summarizing later on, a highly intelligent person. Father died early. She lived with her mother. Mother also very independent, thinking person, close to the socialists, close to Rosa Luxemburg, independent thinker, the mother. And maybe one story which is very famous, maybe you all know it if you ever came across a biography about Hannah Arendt. The mother said to the girl, if one of the teachers at school is bringing an anti-Semitic sentence, you just leave, you just stand up and go and come home. So, and then that's what Hannah Arendt did. And then mother sent one of her letters to the school. So never tolerance to anti-Semitic elements by a teacher at school. But if it came from a comrade, from another pupil, she said, you have to help yourself. So with other children. It was typical for Hannah Arendt's mother. Yeah. Later on, Hannah Arendt, this highly intelligent student, came across philosophy, theology, philology, made a PhD about Augustine's concept of love, and then worked on Jewish issues in an academical way. But then 1933 came, and Hitler gained the power, and for her it was clear you can't go on as before. And she wanted to do something for resistance. And in fact, the Zionists, those who prepared Israel, if I summarize it very shortly, the Zionists, she said it was the only organization, Jewish organization, which I could take for serious at this time, because for them, it was a public question and a political issue, and not only a private issue. She always said, if you are offended as a Jew, you have to respond as a Jew and not saying, oh, yes, I'm just a human being. It doesn't take. No, you are offended as a Jew and you have to answer as a Jew. And in a way, defending oneself as a Jew, it was important for her. And she started to work for Zionist organizations in Paris. Before she had to escape from Berlin, she was brought to prison, and she could escape, and she went to Paris. And her work for the Zionist organization was mainly to help young people, puberty adolescents, to come to Israel. So some of them had no families, some of them had families from East European Jews. They came to Israel as refugees. And then Hannah Arendt worked in an organization. They prepared these 15, 14, 16, 13 years old boys and girls for Israel. That means it was a kind of a school preparing to learn Hebrew and to know about the history and the country, but also many other needed knowledge and needed skills. So they did training courses in agriculture, in economy, and she was organizing, but also she was giving lessons. She was quite a good teacher, Hannah Arendt. And so she came first time to Israel in 1935. It was 1 year after Ita Wegman, by the way. I once gave a lecture about Ita Wegman in Israel. It is in English language as well. You can find it on the homepage of the General Anthroposophical Section or the homepage of the Ita Wegman Institute. So it was in 1934 when Ita Wegman came. Hannah Arendt came in 1935 from Paris to Haifa to Jerusalem. And yeah, and she went on to work for this organization, later on for the Jewish Agency for Palestine from Paris. So this way, going to Israel, Eretz Israel, was very important for her, of course, at this time, even if not, she never said, I'll go there as well. Her main mission was to help these young generations to come from France. And she worked together with Jewish organizations in Berlin in these very, very difficult years. And then after the German army attacked France and occupied France in May 1940, she was arrested. Not by the Germans, but by the French policy. Maybe you know that all those immigrants from Germany and some other countries, they were as enemy alliance, they were arrested, and she was brought to a concentration camp called Gurs, but she could escape again by special circumstances, and she got a chance to go to the United States. And in fact, she left Europe forever in 1941 and lived for the rest of her life in the United States of America, as so many Jews, as you know. The majority who escaped from Poland or from East Europe, they went to the United States or Canada, but mainly the States. And she as well. And she was a New York person in a way, but she visited quite often Europe and also Israel. Relatives were living there, and she was quite often in your country. So she knew it quite well. Unfortunately, I would say, very unfortunately, she never was invited for a lecture in Israel at Hebrew University. And it has to do with her critical position from a political, not only the Eichmann trial. It was full of sympathy for Israel, but she had critical questions to the political Zionism and to the politicians. And she brought them with articles. And this had as an end effect that she could never teach on Mount Scopus, which is very sad from my point of view. But it was the course of history. What kind of articles she published? She became famous, and I think most of you who know Hannah Arendt will know about her theory, or it's a little bit more than a theory, her approach to the system of totalitarianism. So her main books are about the 20th century. And this is not only a kind of a hardened dictatorship. She said this is a new level, what Hitler and Stalin brought as a system, as a new system to run politics. And she studied this system, the totalitarian system, and the technique of death first in articles. She started already in Paris before she came to the States, but later also in the States, and also articles about the stateless minorities of the 20th century, and articles about the problem of nationalism. As anthroposophist, and I think most of you are anthroposophists, maybe all who listen tonight, this was one of the main themes of Dr. Steiner from a political point of view, that we have to overcome any nationalities, that the time of national states is gone, that this kind of national states, this is leading to the abyss. And this old concept of national states has to be overcome. And in Steiner's approach, it was the threefold organism, not only in the state, that we have an independent justice, an independent spiritual, cultural life, an independent economy, but also they work together with the economy, with the cultural life, and with the justice, the policy of the other countries. This will prevent war, Dr. Steiner said. If we have the national state, where under the reign of policy, economy and cultural life are in a way dependent, it is not only that they'll leave their freedom, that the schools can't be any more independent from the state, and in fact, they transfer the ideology of the state. But the problem is also that they create a state, and next door is the other state with his own ideology, with his own schools, and in between is the border. And at the end, the tension is so big that war is coming. So one of the elements of the future, Steiner said, is if we have really independent cultural life, independent economy, and independent justice policy as three realms of a society, these realms will cooperate with the neighbor states, that means with the neighbor schools and the neighbor justice and the neighbor economy, a world economy, but also a world school movement. And I only mention it here because one of Hannah Arendt's main critical points toward Israel, which for her was an important foundation, Eretz Israel, and also as a state, not only as a dream, but as a state. And it became a national state in an old classic sense. And she was fighting only with the pencil, fighting. Writers don't fight, or they fight with the pencil, with her articles, with the book. And she started quite early. And also, maybe it's good to underline that she was not a pacifistic person. I mean, she always wanted to overcome war, but she said in the 1940s, as many other people, we need a Jewish army. So she was very positive to the idea of a Jewish army as part of as the war coalition against Hitler. And she said this will be the way to the United Nations after the war, because then the Jewish army is part of this coalition. And at the end, so she was resistance, but also with arms sometimes. So in this time, it was necessary to fight. And you know probably that Hans Jonas was part of this Jewish army, which was long time forbidden. The British government didn't want to have it, and other governments as well. But lately they got a little opportunity, and Hans Jonas and many others took part in it. So Hannah Arendt sitting in New York, 1941, and asking herself, what can we do to overcome Hitler? And what can we do to save Jewish life? And so in an article in May 1942, she said 1/3 of the entire Jewish population is very close to extermination. And the world is mute. There is silence. I mean, where are the cries now? This is going on. If you are really grasp the information, what is happening in Poland, she said in May 42, the world is mute, and it shouldn't be mute. And she also said, if I wasn't a Jew, a direct quotation of her, but belonged to some other European people, the hairs on my head would stand on end with fear as soon as a hair of a Jewish head was touched. Because she said, it will start with the Jews, but not end there. This is the first nation or people coming to extermination by totalitarianism, but Hitler will not stop there. So people should understand that there is a kind of a dynamic of murdering or extermination, and it's not only a Jewish problem. We should save the lives of all Jews, and we should save the life of all human beings. And she started to publish articles, 1941, 1942. And I mentioned articles about the Warsaw Uprising. And in 1944, there were the first article, if I'm right, where she had critical remarks about Jewish police, Jewish council, Jewish leaders in those countries. So the functionaries and the question of collaboration. So it was not for her a theme only of the Eichmann trial, but of the ongoing politics. But also criticism about political Zionism. In a way, she said, the Israel leaders are not allowed to speak on behalf of all Jewish people in the world. Israel is important, but you can't identify Israel with Judaism in general. And I mean, she was living in New York. There were a lot of, Jews were living in New York, and they were all Jews. And in a way, for Hannah Arendt's estimation, they were all important. So Israel is important, but it is not the voice of Judaism only. And she said there is a certain tendency at this time, we are speaking of 44, of self-centeredness, she said, only preoccupation with the own affairs, and especially to bring in refugees to help them become a stronger factor in Palestine. I mean, we know now from a historical point of view that really David Ben-Gurion he wanted to bring as many people in to Israel, but not only to save lives, but also to make Israel strong against the Arabs. And Hannah Arendt asked if this is the true and the sensible logic. And And also if this image of we are in a world, I mentioned this argument before, the world is hostile and the only safe place is Israel, and anti-Semitism is a kind of law of nature. This was brought as an argument by some, not all, political leaders of the political Zionism, and she said this is not bringing us to the future. Anti-Semitism is not a law of nature, and the world is also not divided in between Israel and the other ones. This will lead to a kind of ideology, if this is going on, and will become the leading line for Israel politics, then at the end we will have a nationalistic state. And she said this is very difficult. We are in the 40s, 1942, 1943, 1944. She published these articles in Jewish organs. So there were some Jewish quarterly organs, newspapers published in New York, the Menorah and Aufbau and some other, and she brought articles. Some of them, they were weekly articles, short, but very good. And she also this time wrote that some political leaders of the political Zionism, they still ignore the Arab question. She said Herzl had not the slightest suspicion that there could be a national conflict with the existing inhabitants of the Promised Land. They did not even waste a thought on the existence of the Arabs. But this, what started with Herzl, she said, this is going on. And we will have a huge problem in the future if we don't solve this question of neighborhood. And if we only feel as being in the status of the persecuted one, and then a culture of immunization against criticism. She said we need to see what, even if we are, and she was persecuted by her own, we have to find a position that we can shape Eretz Israel in a way that it's good. And what was also a problem in her mind, that with Herzl started a kind of policy of protection by the big powers. So first he wanted to have a good protection by the German. So he adored Herzl, the German Wilhelm II emperor. Later on, he tried to come into a good collaboration with the leader of Turkey at this time. Later on, you know it better than me, the English power. And she said, this guarantee of protection, instead of shaping a new country connected with the neighbors and also with the positive forces in the neighborhood, this is a kind of a policy which will not lead to the future. And if we don't believe, she said, that our own policy, independent of the big powers, the big players in this region, if we don't believe in the possibility of an own policy, we are more or less lost. Now we can say, what shall we do? But at this time, maybe it was a sensible time for the future, if there is a new possibility to shape situations. And we also see from Hannah Arendt's critical comments that she saw the incredible achievements of the kibbutzim. This is not so well known in the political literature about Hannah Arendt, that she was very positive to the kibbutzim. And she said, what we see there as a social justice, overcoming selfishness, creating new values. This is something new in the history of the 20th century. What she missed in the first generation of the kibbutzim was the political activity. She said they are more or less apolitical, without any influence on the Israel society. They are more or less interested in their own life, in their own effort, which is understandable, of course, but she said, because it's the most promising social experiment of the 20th century. Isn't it this remarkable sentence that Hannah Arendt said, the kibbutzim is the most promising social experiment of the 20th century. But on the other side, has it a great impact on the course of Israel policy? Today, she's maybe a longer quotation because she was a very, very good writer. Today, she said, Palestine and the establishment of a Jewish homeland represent a great hope and pride of Jews all over the world. It is hard to imagine what would happen to Jews individually and collectively if this hope and pride were to be extinguished in another catastrophe. What is certain is that this catastrophe would become the central event in Jewish history and possibly herald the self-dissolution of the Jewish people. There is not a Jew in the world whose outlook on life and whose world would not be radically changed by such a tragedy. If the Yishuv were to collapse, it would track the collective settlements, the kibbutzim, and these represent perhaps the most promising social experiment of the 20th century, as well as the magnificent part of the Jewish homeland into the abyss. Here, in complete freedom and without any state intervention, a new form of property, a new type of farm, a new way of family life and child rearing was created, and new ways of resolving the difficult conflicts between town and country, between agricultural and industrial labor were found. The people of the kibbutz were too absorbed by their quiet and effective revolution to make their voice heard in Zionist politics. While it is true that the members of the Irgun and the Stern group, you know, the terrorist group of these times, were not recruited from the kibbutzim, it is equally true that the kibbutzim did not seriously oppose Jewish terrorism. She's talking here only about the Jewish part. It was precisely this complete political abstinence, this enthusiasm, this concentration on immediate problems that enabled the kibbutzim pioneers to carry on their work unaffected by the ideologies of our day that are harmful to them, to create new laws and new patterns of behavior, to establish new customs and new values, and to institutionalize them. The loss of the kibbutzim, the demise of the new type of human being, the destruction of their institutions, and the abyss of oblivion in which the fruits of their experience can be provided, this would be one of the worst attacks on the hopes of all those Jews and non-Jews alike who have not yet made peace with the current society and its values and will not do so in the future. For this Jewish experiment in Palestine gives hope for solutions that are not only acceptable and feasible in individual cases, but are possible everywhere for the great mass of humanity, whose dignity and humanity are so threatened in our days by the constraints of modern life and its unresolved problems. So for her, what was tried and to a certain extent also done in Israel, the example of the kibbutz, was also an example of what is needed for the world. For Hannah Arendt, it was clear that the old states and the old organization forms of societies, also how to run economy, how to live private life distant from public life, the culture of egotism, that it has to be overcome. And so the first kibbutz experiments were for her not only a sign of hope for Israel, but also for the world. So she was very positive. And I mean, in a way, it's good that she had not to experience the 7th of October. I mean, to come into the kibbutz. And a second point I wanted to mention here, for her, a sign of hope was the Hebrew University. And I say it really explicitly because next year, 1st of April, it is an important date. And she said this university was to represent the universalism of Judaism in this particular Jewish country. It was not simply intended to be the University of Palestine, but the University of the Jewish people. It is highly significant that the speakers who most consistently and clearly advocated Jewish Arabic understanding came from the Hebrew University. And it is true. I mean, she was befriended with Judah Magnus, who was a long time the president, you know, a rabbi. And the organization created by him for a Jewish Arab approach, for a kind of coming together. You know that Martin Buber was close in touch with all these very important initiatives. Hugo Bergmann. Bergmann came from the threefold ideas of Dr. Steiner. And he was the first man who published articles about the threefoldness of the society in Hebrew when he came to Israel in Palestine in 1920. So Hannah Arendt knew there were forces and in the country really standing for overcoming national societies. And of course, we can say now it's all gone, but it's not true. I mean, some of you ever practice this neighborhood and will ever do. From a political point of view, it is maybe more difficult than ever before. But she said there is a chance, there was a chance, hopefully there is a chance. She said the Jewish and Arab people, the opportunity for close cooperation between two peoples, one of which embodies the most advanced tendencies of Western civilization, while the other is a former victim of colonial oppression and backwardness. I mean, this was not for her a judgment about the whole Arab culture, not at all, but what she met there in Palestine, there were victims, she said, of colonial oppression. And so the advanced, the Jews coming from Europe with the money and with culture, with technology, and the other ones. Jews and Arabs can be forced by circumstances to show the world that there are no differences between two peoples that cannot be bridged. Indeed, if such a modus vivendi is created, it could eventually serve as a model for how to combat the dangerous tendencies of formerly oppressed people to isolate themselves from the rest of the world and develop their own nationalist superiority complex. There were many other interesting aspects about this cooperation she saw also on a local level. she said, necessary to work together politically in the community, in the school, but she saw also the other forces in the country, the nationalist forces, and those who wanted to have a pure Jewish Palestine and no cooperation. And so we know that in the 40s, now more than 85 years ago, it was a huge discussion, and she saw the war coming. And also she saw the refugees coming. At the end, there were these 700,000 Arab refugees. And yeah, I thought when I published the book at the beginning of the year that Hannah Arendt stopped then talking about the political Israel situation in 1949, because it was done in a way. Until her death in 1975, I did not find any more texts where she was active for another shaping of the society and the state. And I thought that she resigned. I mean, she still came to visit relatives, and also she, of course, took part from the distance in all what happened, but never wrote any more articles. But now, I think, end of last year, it was in November 23, when two politicians of the Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Beersheba, they made an analysis about a study published in 1958 of 17 scientists of the United States, and one of the authors was Hannah Arendt. It is called The Palestine Refugee Problem, a New Approach and a Plan for a Solution. So she took part in a publication of 17 scientists about the refugee problem in 1958. So I was wrong. I thought she stopped writing, but she took part in this. They wanted to prepare a kind of a solution at this time of the problem, that at this time 1 million of Arabs were refugees, and how to bring them back. Is there a possibility to create new social forms? And this was the challenge of this time, or of these 17 scientists from the United States of America. And I found it quite interesting that the text is now published in German just recently, and but it was discovered in a way at Beersheba University, so in Israel itself, by two scientists, or they brought attention on the text. The danger of a catastrophe in Palestine, I don't know, and I don't want to know what would happen to Jews all over the world and Jewish history in the future if a catastrophe were to occur in Palestine. Hannah Arendt, she said, in the morning, I start every morning to read the journal, what is going on in Israel. So for her, it was a never-ending story. And in our days, where many of us far away from Israel start the day as well in the same time. So we feel connected to Hannah Arendt in a way. She had this relationship, and I hope that I could show that her criticism was not just a criticism, or and from an anthroposophical point of view, I would say her ideas about shaping new states, new economy, new cultural life, new political life, they are absolutely up to date. And if a future is possible, I would say not only in Israel, in other states as well, for the future, for the long-term future, we need such ideas. Give me another 5 minutes, and then we'll have still 10 minutes for questions or remarks. But another 5 minutes for Hannah Arendt, maybe, if you don't mind. So the little third part. For me, she's one of these spirits of the past still present. And this is a lady who had an enormous, I would say, a gift of being present when she was alive. Still today, you can listen to her. There are on YouTube interviews with Hannah Arendt. I don't know if they are in English as well. In German they are, but probably also in English. Her English was much better than mine, which is not difficult. And this is, if she was talking to somebody, it was kind of being so present, so awakened, this kind of intellectual presence, and she was very passionate in the dialogue. And it must have been a huge joy to talk with her, to think with her. Hans Jonas once said, the real passion in Hannah Arendt's life, even if she was really a loving person to Heinrich Blücher, her husband, and first of all, she fell in love with Martin Heidegger, her beloved philosophical teacher in Germany. So she was a loving person, but Hans Jonas said the main passion of her was thinking. And then he said also thinking with her was a moral activity. It's very interesting, the terminus thinking with her. I ask myself sometimes, how can we gain the ability to think with Dr. Steiner? In reading Steiner, to think with him, he was a thinker. And in a way, thinking is very helpful for us. It is also very healthy. When I was still working in the hospital as a psychiatrist for youth and adolescents, I was quite often reading texts with my patients, not of Steiner mainly, reading together, thinking together. At the end, we did not need any more texts, but how to come to think together. And now Jonas is saying thinking with her was a moral activity. A moral activity. Interesting. In one sentence, Hannah Arendt says, I know of no other reconciliation than thinking. Keine andere Versöhnung in German, Versöhnung, reconciliation, thinking. It's a very anthroposophical idea that thinking is a reconciliation. Steiner said of the cosmos, of the split in between the world of ideas and the sensual world. Thinking is the bridge. It is restoring the cosmos because the split was done for the human being. I don't know if her interpretation of reconciliation is mine, but it's very interesting, the capacity of reconciliation in thinking. I don't know how it is the actual situation in the Israel society, but I know that we have many situations now. In a way, it started with Corona, where we have these enormous splits in the society, really deep splits, abysses in between human beings by their convictions. So how to bridge in between thinking together, not discussing only? How do we develop a culture of thinking together instead of losing ourselves in discussions? And she said, what matters to me is the thinking process itself, not the end result. The end result can be, I think about Ben Gurion like this, and the other one is the opposite. So when we published a book together, Constanze Karlix and me, with Udi Levi. Udi wanted to have a photograph of himself with David Ben-Gurion and Orna. A wonderful photograph, the young Orna, the young Udi, and the old Ben-Gurion. It's good, a very wonderful, I think, a wonderful picture in it. And independent of what I think or we all think about Ben-Gurion, because there are many splits. For the one, he's still a hero, and for the other one, the same with Herzl. So we have these splits. But how do we overcome it? These splits, so how do we come in the process of thinking, she asks. Also, another quotation, she was talking about the gap between past and future, which is the proper temporal locus of thought. A gap between past and future is the temporal locus of thought. It's very interesting that in thinking, we are not belonging to the past and maybe also not belonging to the future. So real presence, I activity in thinking. And the personal thinking, not only to accept what is mainline, what science says, follow the science. I mean, she meant it in a good way. Not Hannah Arendt, but you know her. Follow the science, climate problems. But what kind of science? Is it good to follow the science blindly? What science says, but we know that it is not only one science. It is very difficult if somebody pretends science says. It is a little bit the Catholic religion says, or the Pope says. And she was a real scientist, Hannah Arendt. And she said, never do it. One could probably say that a person's living humanity diminishes to the extent that they renounce thinking and entrust themselves to the results, the known or unknown truth, and play them off as if they were coins with which one can settle all experiences. We know these coins, don't we? From political discussions, from Corona discussions, the truth as coins. Science says, but the true thinking process is never a coin. It is never finished. In a way, it is always, as Hannah Arendt said, provisional. I think it's also so important for us in Anthroposophy that we don't think we have coins, Steiner's coins. Yeah. No, it is in a way also Anthroposophy, in my understanding, even if I'm leading a section or a department in the Goetheanum, but I would say because I'm leading a section or departing in the Goetheanum with others, it is not a coin, Anthroposophy. It is not Steiner said, and this is the end result, but how do we come into the thinking process? How do we come stimulating thoughts? How do we bring things in motion? And also a conversation. We know these discussions, which are no conversations. Hannah Arendt said, conversation is joy, not suffering. And truly human conversation differs from mere discussion in that it is completely imbued with joy, joy in the other person. And what they are saying is tuned, as it were, by the tone of joy. Wonderful, isn't it? The joy, what the other one is saying, not what I am saying, my own position, my own conviction, but listen to what is coming from the other one. Try to immerse the thoughts of the other one or the thinking process, as Steiner said. He said, this is the Christ impulse. If we really come into the activity of the thinking of the other one, the thinking of the other one, also in a political sense, yeah, the other perspective, very difficult if we are hurted, if we are traumatized, if we are attacked. But in a way, from an anthropological point of view, there is no other way to the future than the perspective of the other ones. And maybe last point, I said 5 minutes, Hannah Arendt was a genius of friendship, I would say. Friendship and spiritual exchange with others. She said at the end of a letter discussion with Gershom Scholem, she said at the end, you know, I'm more interested in you than in your opinions. I have the conviction that every human being is more important than its thoughts and convictions. So she kept the relationship, even there was a complete split in the convictions. And this is very wonderful that she, yeah. And the very last point, for me, she was always a person of hope. Even if she was the best, I would say, thinker of the abyss after Steiner, thinker of the abyss of the 20th century, totalitarianism, analysis of evil. She was almost clairvoyant, but clairvoyant in the sense of Karl Jaspers, the philosopher, who said, even in the most evil situations, her thinking, the power of her clairvoyant presence of mind did not cease. A clairvoyant presence of mind. But even if she was so aware of evil, she was a person of the future. And please, if you have time, read again her book in English, Life of the Mind. And there is a chapter about the human will capacity. A very, I would say, yeah, I wouldn't say anthroposophical, but it's so close to Steiner's approach to the spiritual substance of will and the future. She said, the will is an organ of freedom and of future. So it's a very difficult day today, I believe, in Israel, with this evening, with this morning. And we don't know what other days will come. But how not to lose hope, the substance of hope, a real force, as Dr. Steiner said, a vital force. As anthroposophists, we should be imbued with the spirit of hope. It's sometimes so difficult. And I end with a sentence of Hannah Arendt. We are all dependent on saying, Lord, forgive me. Lord, forgive them for what they are doing, because they do not know what they are doing. This applies to all actions, simply in concrete terms, because you can't know. That is a risk. And now I would say that this risk is only possible by trusting in people. In other words, in a trust in the humanity of all people, which is difficult to grasp precisely, but which is fundamental. There is no other way. She's highlighting that if we are doing things, we don't know the outcome. Dr. Rittelmeier, the priest, once asked Steiner, isn't it possible for a clairvoyant initiate as you to see the end of the First World War? How will be the end? Isn't it possible to see it? Steiner said, yes, but the law, the spiritual law is, if I want to see it, I'm not allowed to act anymore. But I want to change the end. So I do, and I resign from foreseeing. And in a way, This is what we usually do. We do, and we don't know what is the end. That is a kind of a risk. And now Hannah Arendt said this risk is only possible by trusting in people. So we don't know what will be the end of this huge conflict situation now, but maybe this kind of hope, trusting in people for this open future, is a kind of a result of studying or listening or thinking with Hannah Arendt. So I hope that this presentation, which was too long, sorry, is not understood as a lesson, because the situation has changed, and these are, as I mentioned, quotations and thoughts 80 years ago, even if I believe that some of them are still remarkable. But it's not meant as a lesson, not meant as an advice, but in a presentation of a human being, of a leading spirit of our time. And I think that a connection to her is hopefully helpful for us in Eretz Israel, but also in other parts of the world. So thank you for giving me the chance to present part of Hannah Arendt's struggle with Israel and with our modern time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much on behalf of all of us. Yes, to interesting and inspiring words you gave us, and thank you for your empathic and warmth gesture, through your words. And I would like to ask if someone wants to ask something or to add something or to say something. It's now the time. You have to unmute yourself and you can ask or say.
Yehuda, I can see that you want to speak, so please speak.
Okay. We really appreciate from the bottom of our heart your understanding, and we appreciate your understanding situation of the Jewish people in the past and today. But it's difficult for me to ignore what's happening today in Israel, in Europe, and in America. Europe did not pay attention to the new enemy which it brought itself. This is the radical Islam. What do you think about it? What the people in Dornach think about the situation? And we remember what Rudolf Steiner said about the Islam.
Thank you. It is not possible to say what the Dornach people think, because this is not a community of common thoughts, or in Dornach or in Arlesheim or in Berlin, they are all individuals, and there is also no opinion of the Goetheanum in the sense of Hannah Arendt. It would be an error to have an opinion of the Goetheanum or something like this. I think the problem of radicalization and fundamentalism in Islam, but not only in Islam, is absolutely one of the most challenging changes of the 20th century. And I did not talk about it because I did not talk about what is the need of our time or what happened since Hannah Arendt died. But I will say in my personal perception. It is absolutely true what you said. The only thing is, for me, it's not only in Islam. The problem of political fundamentalism and radicalization happens in different religion and cultural departments and streams, and is not limited, unfortunately, but it's absolutely dangerous. And yeah, it has to do from an anthroposophical point of view with this upcoming of the beast. Steiner said at the end of the 20th century, שראה will elevate his head. And I think we have seen it in the course of the 20th century, and it's there. It's there in this kind of absolute brutalization and absolute dehumanization, combined with the technological possibility to do things which were never possible in the whole history of mankind. But the only thing I want to say, I wouldn't focus only on one special religion. I know that Steiner in his lectures focused on it, but not only there. There are other lectures by him where he say it can be very difficult also in other regions. But you have to do with this. So insofar, I completely understand that your focus is there. I have it in mind, and I think many people in Dornach and other places have it in mind. But I don't think that what Hannah Arendt brought is without value, because in a way, these truths brought by her are for me still true. And the other question is if this kind of radicalization and fundamentalization was needed. It's belonging to the history. It had to come, or do we prepare the ground also for radicalization and demonization? Is it only that it came into the course of the history, or is it part of the responsibility of the 20th century that it did not avoid and did not prepare other conditions? So in a way, yeah, I think it is in our mind, or in my mind, even it was not part of the lecture. I mentioned at one point also that she was, I mean, when Menachem Begin came for the first time to New York, Hannah Arendt and collected money. Hannah Arendt, together with Albert Einstein and other persons, make a protest note to the New York Times. At this time, he was working for a terrorist group. Later on, I know he became a famous politician. So I only wanted to say, without comparing in any way, that for Hannah Arendt, radicalization, terrorism, or even more than terrorism, I mean, the system of the annihilation, extermination camps was more than Ahriman, much more than Ahriman. She was studying these processes. So I hope that I was not completely out of, but I understand that you miss the dangerous element of what happened since. Yeah, thank you.
Dalia? Dalia, you want to ask something? You opened your microphone before. Did you want to ask something, or we'll move to Liora? Okay, Liora.
I wanted to something between hear your opinion and remark. Steiner speaks about looking at forces in society that we have to prepare the human being in his looking at other human beings, and from that all the other economical and social things will move. He also speaks in another place of using our egoism to widen it, to have the whole humanity and even the whole earth under our egoism. And I'm telling this when talking also about the nations. The following period should be the period of the human being, but the world is still working in nations. And this is a situation we are and we should work with, preparing, hoping, listening, putting in our heart the bigger theme. So this is one thing I wanted to say. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I don't know how much you know with the kibbutzim. Like with many things that were extreme, this social human experiment didn't always work so well. And today, most of the kibbutzim who still function as a kibbutzim are actually the Jewish religious kibbutzim, which has never put God out of the equation and has always kept the family with the parents raising their children before the society. So this is another remark. And the third remark, with this period of Surat and this period of Ariman coming, I think we see it all over. We see it with the dehumanization of other people in Corona times, with trying to rule out people's life. But again, we see it because we're here. I think religious fundamentalism, and we see it more with Islam, is more susceptible to fall into following this, using the human being for hatred, unfortunately. So I would like to hear what you think of it.
To think of what? These were many perspectives or many hints. I can't comment all what you have said. What is your special interest? Where I shall respond to?
I think the special interest for all now is how we can work as our individual human beings with different circles around us in trying to bring this vision of humanity forward. Because right now there are a lot of forces in different places, here and others, that work against it. And a lot of deception with the media and also the social media. Deception is really a problem there too.
Yeah. In a way, I don't think that I'm the person to give these advices. And I would like to, in a spiritual sense, to dedicate this evening to Hannah Arendt, and to be honest, what she said at the end, so the last third part, this is for me a path to the future. What she described there as the thinking reconciliation, about the thinking process, about the real conversation and the need for real conversation. I think if we would really practice this, and we can also describe it in anthroposophical terms, this culture of a dialogue is so often used now, but it's the mystery of in between I and you, what Martin Buber described. It's the mystery of in between I and you, if where Christ is present, if we try to do this wherever we live in our surrounding. I think this is a golden path to the future. And even such an evening as today, I mean, you know, of course, now you can comment the lecture or the presentation and the missing elements and the wrong things, but maybe if we do so, I mean, you are free to do, but this is not opening windows. I mean, all the time there are missing elements, and all the time something could be better. But to go into the substance of her thoughts and thinking process and the moral activity which is touching our heart, I think this is widening our horizon, and this is widening our social ability. For me, it was always very impressive how Steiner described the Whitsun disciple, what happened on Whitsun. Not only the Holy Spirit came over them, but also the widening of the soul, that they were in their hearts in a way changed. And at the end, they were able to understand and to talk to people because they were living out of them. So they were practicing the language of the other ones. And I think this is a very striking image for what kind of transformation is needed for the future of human beings. And maybe we tried the first steps, but this is the only thing, and I would like to focus here on Arendt's contribution. But what I heard in the last third part is a little bit like this, the mystery of social life. And as you said, we are still in the time of national states, not only in Israel, everywhere. And in a way, sometimes nationalism is even bigger than ever before. So this is partly the spirits of the past getting stronger and stronger instead of the Michael spirit, which is irritating us. I think they are both present in our time, Michael and the opposite. And insofar, how to prepare, as you said in a very wonderful way, how to prepare the future living in the present, which is partly the past. This is one of our main challenges. And so maybe we have to keep the balance in between the future, the present, and the past. Yeah, thank you for your contribution, and I can't comment it all. But maybe there are other questions at the ending time. I don't know.
No questions, but really we appreciate your time and appreciate your goodwill, and thank you for build the bridge between Steiner and Hannah Arendt. You know, it was something very special you did for us. Thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always good to hear you.
It was the words of a friend, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
We could feel your heart.
Good. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.